And because I could speak some level of English, people tended to believe me that, okay, he must be telling the truth. So sometimes I go out to beg, and from morning till evening, I'll get back to the bunk with over 100,000 naira. Yes, because the desperation to use the drugs, if I met you on the road, you would believe anything I told you. I would like to commend the leadership of this church for allowing us to speak on a pertinent issue that a lot of organizations, a lot of religious bodies, the government, individuals have put at the back, and it has had devastating consequences on lots of people. We're going to be talking about my journey through addiction to substances. And I'd like us to give me your attention for the next few minutes, please. In the last weeks, I've been traveling. I've been to about 11 states in the country to speak to persons like this, in gatherings like this. And then when I was called and invited to this place, I wasn't sure I was going to be here or at our base in Enugu State. But as God will have it, I had another seminar this week, and I just said, okay, I'll wait to be with you today because I have an instruction from God to keep sharing my testimony so that people can be blessed and people can adjust. So I'd like to say one thing before and it does not apply to you. It does apply to everybody. 2 months ago or 3 months ago, I was in Lagos for a documentary. And then somebody called me and she said her 13-year-old son is struggling with substances. So I said to her, I'm so busy now, I can't help, I'm not around, but I'll give you the number of one of my colleagues. So she thanked me. And then I got back home and I remember that somebody called me about a 13-year-old boy. And so I put a call across to her and I said, how is the issue coming up? And she told me that she lost her son due to a drug overdose. So a 13-year-old boy died from a drug overdose should tell us that the age range of young persons that are struggling with substances, more and more and more, very, very fervent Christian parents. And then my parents belonged to one of the old generation churches, very close to the leadership of that church. So from birth, I was always in church. You know, the church was my environment. The church was my playground. The church was the place I knew. So much so that by the age of 8, I could comfortably read the Bible and teach it to my peers. When I was 13, I was leading what we call the Home Cell Fellowship in our church. What I'm saying. So at the time, my parents' best understanding of parenting was to make sure I was always in the church. It was to make sure I was always in Christian environments, including Christian primary schools, Christian secondary school, and like was said shortly ago, I ended up in Covenant University for my first degree. Now, like I like to tell people, ironically, it was on the grounds of Covenant University that I had my first exposure to hard drugs. So you see the irony, where some of us as parents think we have sent our children or our words to places where they can be caged from these vices. It will surprise you to know that it is everywhere. Last year, I was speaking at a youth conference in Canaan land, and when I was done with my first session, a 16-year-old girl walked up to me with cocaine. And she said she came for that program with those drugs because she has been using it for the last 9 months, and she will not sleep, or she cannot sleep, if she doesn't do cocaine. And I'll tell people, certain persons have sent their children to that youth conference, not knowing that they might be exposed to other persons who are using substances. What am I saying? I'm not saying don't take people to church or don't take people to youth gatherings, Christian youth gatherings. What I'm saying is it's not where you send your children to that matters. It's not where you stay that matters. It's what you have inside you that will count. It's what you have inside of you, what is built inside of you, that will determine your outcome at the end of the day. So I'll go back to my story. So Covenant University, somebody said, David, come, let's go to where we have now is the library. It was an incomplete building at the time because I was the first set. So we went there and I saw people smoking what I now know is marijuana, drinking. And they said, David, why don't you try it? This is something I had no knowledge of. And I said, no, I didn't want to. So I just kept on watching them, and that impression was built on my mind. I didn't join them that day, and I actually did not join them all through my school. So I scaled through school successfully. And then because I was very intelligent, when I wrote JAMB, I was the fourth in the entire country. So I was blessed with some level of wisdom by God. I went on to the UK for my master's. And I lived with 2 Europeans who were also always doing drugs. So I found myself among people doing drugs again. And it begs the question, so should we not send our children abroad for them to study? No. Because there are still people who go abroad to study and do not fall prey to substance use. However, if our kids are not equipped with the right life skills to help them make sure they don't get involved, then yes, they are going to fall prey. So this flatmates of mine kept on saying, David, why don't you try this? One was from Italy, one was from Spain. Why don't you try this? Why don't you try this? Why don't you try this? And I kept on saying, no. So I tried to use the little scriptures I had, to counter what they were offering to me. But then these are people who do not know the Bible and can't be bothered about what you're saying. So eventually, because what you condone around you, you eventually become. I started experimenting with these substances. And then I came back to Nigeria for a family function in August. And then a friend of mine, who also went to Covenant University, introduced me to a drug called crack cocaine. Now that's one of the most addictive, one of the most elusive, and one of the most expensive substances on earth. And I started using that in August of that year, and very quickly I got addicted to it. It started from experimenting, which is how it starts most of the time. Let me just try it. Curiosity. Let me just try it. And then I did. And then I got addicted very quickly. It happened that I started spending all of the money I had. Like I said, it's very expensive. Currently, it goes for about 30,000 naira a gram, and then it's done in 5 or 10 minutes. And then you want more. That's why I said it's addictive. And it's also elusive because you're never going to get enough of it. So you're just going to keep spending all of the money you have to get more and more and more. So I had spent almost everything I had, and then I started selling my property. Okay, by the time I got back, my parents rented me an apartment in Abuja and bought me a car because their son has come back from doing his master's, so he deserved something. And then they furnished it very nicely for me. And so when I spent all of the money I had, and I'll put this in perspective, I spent in 2011, between August and December, over 3 million naira on drugs. At that time, I began selling the property in my house because I didn't have any money. So when the urge comes, I'll pick the TV set and sell it off. And when I'm done with that, I'll take the sofa out and sell it off. And I kept on doing this until everything in the house was gone. So I called my landlord. They paid the rent for 2 years. I stayed 3 months. I sold everything in the house. And I said, I don't want to stay in your house anymore. Can I have my money back? So he said, okay, I'll give you your money back. And the next day, true to his word, he calls me and I go to a bank and he gives me 750,000 naira in cash. And then I'm in front of the bank frantically trying to call a dealer, the people that sell these things. And the dealer kept wasting my time. Somebody walks up to me out of nowhere and says, sir, I think you're trying to get XYZ. And I said, yes, I am. So he said, instead of making calls to somebody who is going to tell you he's in traffic, he's in this, he's in that, why don't I take you to where we call the bunks? Now, the bunks are an open market for drugs. We have them in every state in this country. Open markets where people just come in, sit down, like you're buying any other regular provisions or anything. So you just go there. So he takes me there. This was very early in the morning, like 9 a.m. And when I got there, I saw young persons, I saw old people, I saw people who were educated, I saw people who were illiterate, all in that place. Filthy, dirty. Oh, Jesus. You can't imagine people throwing up on the floor, people passing excreta on the floor. There's nowhere to shower. And then you see people who have obviously been there for weeks or months or years and have never had a shower. That's how that place is. But then everybody in that place was held by one common factor, which is addiction to drugs. By the way, I'll give you a definition for addiction, just since we're talking about health. Addiction is a chronic relapsing brain disease characterized by the compulsive need to engage in a behavior or to consume a substance irrespective of its harmful consequences. Now, that's the approved international definition of addiction. So addiction is not a moral failing. Addiction is not a habit. Addiction is not a character. Addiction does not mean somebody is bad. We need to get better knowledge to be able to help people who are struggling with addiction. So everybody in that bunk that day had his or her own peculiar story. I couldn't be bothered. I had 750,000 naira in cash. I walked up to the guy who was selling the drugs, and we got off immediately. I started spending and spending and spending, and in 5 days, less than 5 days, I had spent all of that money. So now I didn't have a house anymore, because now I was in this dirty, filthy place that you can't just imagine any responsible person being in. And I'll put this in context for you. I met a girl there who was 17 years old. At the time, she was pregnant. And then she explained to me how she started using drugs in secondary school, and then she got pregnant, came to the bunk, and then her parents didn't want to see her anymore. And so she carried that pregnancy to full term in the bunk, and she had a bouncing baby boy. So when she had the child, everybody rejoiced. And what we naturally felt was she was going to go back to her family and things like that. But she just stayed there. And 2 weeks after the birth of this child, she had the urge, the compulsive need, like I just defined addiction, to use drugs. But she didn't have any money. Most of the times, most of the ladies in the bunk will have to sell themselves to be able to get money to buy these things. Because like I said, it's expensive. She had just put to birth, so she couldn't do that. And then one of the dealers walked up to her and said, because by the time you start itching and then the urges come and you're very uncomfortable, everybody knows. So the dealer walked up to her and said, you seem to really want this really badly. And she said, yes. She was sitting next to me. And he said, okay, are you willing to sell your child? So when he said that, I was expecting her to say no. But then when I didn't hear anything from her. I could tell she was contemplating it. And before I could turn to her to say, what are you even thinking about? She said, yes, you can have the baby and give me this amount of drugs. So they negotiated, literally. No, I'll give you this amount. No, I will take this amount. Okay, they came to an agreement. We'll give you so amounts for your child. And then they made some calls, and an unmarked vehicle that was tinted came. They passed the baby through the window of that car. Till this very day, I don't know what became of that child. That's one of the most extreme cases of what addiction can do to a person. I tried to go back home from the bunk. I needed to talk to my parents. So I went back and I spoke to my mom. But my mom did not know what to do. She was naive, which is why the information must keep being put out there on how to handle young persons who are struggling with addiction. All she knew to do was to pray. And God bless her heart, that's what she knew how to do. So she asked me to kneel down and she will pray for me. And then, of course, the urges will come, the cravings will come, and then I'll go back to the bunk. So now I started stealing from my own house to take to the bunk to exchange for drugs. At a point in time, I decided, okay, let me go to my pastor. He's the pastor of one of the biggest churches in the country. He must know something. He must know something about this. So I go to see him, and then he says, oh, David, you look so, because I was looking horrible. I went right from the bunk, maybe after 3 months of not having a shower or nothing, and I go straight to his office. So you can imagine the stench that comes into the office. But because I grew up with them, nobody was going to stop me from seeing him. So he said, David, you look so this, you look so that. What's the problem? And I said, Daddy, I'm struggling with addiction. And he said, oh, that's not good. Okay, kneel down, I'm going to pray for you. So I knelt down, he prayed for me, he poured holy oil on my head, and he gave me a mantle to tie on my neck, and he said I wasn't going to use drugs anymore. And then when I was leaving, he told his secretary to give me a very fat envelope, and I took that envelope back to the bunk to spend anointed money on drugs. So you see, sometimes I also tell religious leaders, I did a training for a particular church and their team, their leadership. And I said, as much as you are anointed by God to lead us, there are certain things you need to get knowledge on. Because it's elementary. You don't give someone who is struggling with addiction money, because that's one big trigger. So I went back to the bunk. I have to cut this short because my time is very short. I went back to the bunk. It was still the same struggle. I'll go out in a day and I start begging people on the streets, making up stories. Something happened, my mother is dead, my mother has kidney failure, or I have kidney failure. And because I could speak some level of English, people tended to believe me that, okay, he must be telling the truth. So sometimes I go out to beg, and from morning till evening, I'll get back to the bunk with over 100,000 naira. Yes, because the desperation to use the drugs, if I met you on the road, you would believe anything I told you. So that was what I was doing. And at some point, I was taken to, I had an issue with NDLEA. I got arrested. And then my parents said, okay, we're going to take you to Ibadan. We're going to take you to Ibadan. So we're taking you to a totally different environment. You're going to go and stay with our pastor there. You're going to start a new life. Maybe it's this Abuja. I didn't even mention. I gave out my international passport, my visa, as part of collateral to get drugs. And that went. Never got it back till this day. So I was stuck in the country. So there was no even option of saying, let them ship me out abroad. And so they took me to Ibadan. So I was with our pastor there. I'd spent 2 or 3 months, and I was doing very well. I was getting my life back. And one day, I went out to wash my car. The car was parked. And the guy right next to me was on the phone, and I could hear him. He was speaking Hausa, and I speak Hausa very well. He was speaking Hausa, and he was talking to somebody about drugs, and he was like, he has 10 grams of cocaine on him. And so, where should the person bring you to? Oh, my days. I'm like, so I've left Abuja, and this devil has followed me to Ibadan. So I walked up to him, and I said, sorry, sir, I don't mean to interrupt, but I heard you talking about XYZ. And he said, he looked at me, and he said, maybe he thought I was law enforcement or something, and I wanted to arrest him. So he said, no. So I started begging him, and literally knelt down. So the guy said, okay, stand up and come. So he asked me questions on how to use it. Because if you're using a drug like crack cocaine, you should know the ways it can be used. So I told him all of the ways it can be used. So he said, oh, yeah, I remember. So he said, the 10 grams he has here is for a politician he's taking to, but he will take me to a bunk in Ibadan. So I had run from one in Abuja, and just like that, I had found someone who was going to take me to another one in Ibadan. So he took me there. That was July of 2015. And I was there till November. I didn't live there. So everybody was now looking for me afresh. So I'd sold my phone, because obviously when you run out of money, that's the first thing you sell. I'd sold my phone, so nobody could reach me. And then I will keep borrowing people's phones to call friends and family. I'm stuck, I'm stranded, give me money. So the thing, I was trying to sell my car, but the guy wouldn't just take it. And I didn't know the city very well, so I didn't know who to take it to sell. So one night, on the 23rd of November, 2015, I was driving back. This was 11 p.m. Since July, nobody had seen me. I was driving back. For those of us that know Ibadan very well, around Challenge. I was driving, and then I had an accident, a very ghastly accident. It so happened that the car had flipped, I had come out. I was unconscious because I had been taking drugs. So when I woke up, I saw a lot of people around me, and I tried to quickly get up to run. But then I couldn't get up. So everybody said, no, don't move, just stay down. And then I pulled myself up, and I looked at the floor, and my right leg was broken. My fibula was literally fractured. It was broken, like I could see my bones and blood all over the floor. So people now started trying to get me help. And then one good Samaritan comes along, and he says, okay, let's put his leg on a flat surface, and let's take him to UCH. So we're going to UCH, and they're calling the consultant orthopedician. That's what it's called, right? Orthopedic, the guys that do bones. So he said, yes, he's around, they should bring me. In fact, he was downstairs. And as soon as they brought me to him, the prof took off his glasses. This was now like 12 midnight. And he looked at it, and he said, they should go and prepare the amputating table. They are going to amputate me from my knees. So the guy that brought me there, I don't know him. He said, no, sir, can't anything else be done? He said, no, that, look, they have to amputate it. He was already telling the nurse and everybody that they should prepare. So the guy said no. So they took me to another hospital in Bodija. It's a Methodist hospital. And the consultant there looked at it and said, oh, they have to amputate this leg. So at that time, the drugs had started to wear out, and I started to feel the pain. Now imagine you have an open wound. Your leg is broken, just there over your ankle. You can imagine the pain. So I started crying, and I started asking that they should amputate the leg. Meanwhile, they asked me for family's number. Who can we call? You must know somebody. So I gave them my mom's number, and this is quite funny, because they called my mom at 12 midnight, and they say, Ma'am, your son had an accident, his leg is broken. And my mom says, she says, you know African mother, she says, ooh, you people are lying. You are trying to get money from me. David, I know all your tricks. I'm not going to send any money. And she puts off her phone. So they're trying to call her back, but her phone is off. They call my dad, and as my dad just heard, he didn't even wait for the vid. He just put off his phone. So there was nobody for me to call. So this good Samaritan now said he was making calls where we were at Bodija. And then somebody said, there's a hospital, around Dugbe. It's a small hospital. But the guy just got out of medical school. The guy might know something to do. So they take me there. And this guy is literally fresh out of school. So I'm thinking, if the professors and the consultants in UCH cannot do anything, what's this young guy going to do? So he looks at it, and the first thing he says was, couldn't they even cover it up? Even if they didn't want to work on it, the least they could have done was wrap it up so that it will stop more infection from coming in. So he did that, and then he says he might not be able to do something. So I said, okay. So he calls. His name is Professor Ogidingbe. And then that same Good Samaritan takes me there to Obafemi Awolowo University Teaching Hospital from Ibadan. Now, in all of this, he was only recording all the processes. When we got to OAU, he makes payment and leaves. Until this very day, I've never seen him again. Till this very day, I've been on TV so many times, I've been on so many programs, I've talked about my story, and I always say, wherever he is, if he's listening, I want to reach out, I want to see him again. I've never seen him again. So now I'm in OAU. They had sent all of the pictures and evidences to my parents. So now they know it's true. So they come over. How to hold it together. They had to chisel part of the bones. Very painful experience. Extremely painful. And then my leg was hung. I was told I wasn't going to walk for a long period. So now I have to rush because of my time. So now I was there for 3 months, but I was still suffering from addiction. I had physical pain, but then my mind was still sick because I was still struggling from addiction. So I started trying to think of how I can get the drugs in the hospital. Because I was in a private ward, so I looked for the weakest link. I'm a fine boy now. I saw one nurse, and I started checking her. And I said, look, you're a nurse. It's your duty to actually take care of me. And she says, yes. And I said, the medicine you people are giving me in this hospital is not working. There's something I want you to go to EBODA to get for me. Do not look at what it is. Just bring it back. And she started getting me drugs to use in the hospital. Well, eventually she was sacked when it was found out. But then that's what happened. So I got discharged. I had a big cast on my leg. The doctor says, don't put your feet on the ground or you will actually not walk again. You will actually now have to amputate it because of the metal inside. So I go back to Abuja. I have this big cast on my leg. I'm using crutches. And one day, because they moved all my things downstairs, I'm just looking out my window. I see a taxi driving past, and I shout, taxi. He stops. In my crutches, I go to the taxi, and I say, take me to XYZ, the bunk. And in my crutches, he takes me there. I had picked one or two things from the house. I get to the bunk. These agents of devil, the dealers, are so happy to see me because they have not seen me for so long since I went to Ibadan. Now they started giving everybody free drugs because one of their biggest customers is back. And then when that elapsed, money had now finished. Time for me to go home. I couldn't go home. And then one of them walks up to me and says, Oga, are you using this your crutches? I had a big bandage cast on my leg, and my leg couldn't touch the ground. And he was asking me if I'm using the crutches. So I said, if I give you the crutches, will you give me anything? He said, yes, now. So I took my crutches and gave to him. And then he gave me drugs in exchange. The drugs didn't last 10 minutes. And then my eyes cleared. Now I was in the bunk. There's no money with me. There are no crutches. So I had to start hopping on my left leg. So I was hopping. I probably hopped the distance of here to the junction where you turn in from that Lekki Expressway. And then when I got there, I just collapsed. Somebody saw me there, picked me up. Somebody from Covenant University knew who I was, called my parents. They took me to a hospital. Let me cut the long story short. This process of going to the bunk, suffering one casualty or the other, kept on happening. And then a lot of people say, what was your turning point? Or what was your wake-up moment? And I keep saying there were a lot of wake-up moments, but I never woke up. I had a friend. Finally, let me wrap up. I had a friend in the bunk. His name was Junior. He also schooled in the UK. So we could relate when we were in the bunk because everybody had their cliques. And then one day he says, look, David, I'm going out to go and hustle. Hustle is anything. Steal, defraud people, just anything you do to get money to come back and use for drugs. So that day I didn't feel up to it. So I just said, okay, please can you go? When you come back, whatever you make, we'll share it. So he said, fine. So he left. He didn't come back that day. He didn't come back the second day. And on the evening of the third day, somebody comes and tells us that Junior has been killed. So he went out to a place they call Maraba in Abuja. They were selling, these Hausa people selling gold there. He went and he tried to steal from them. They caught him, beat him up, burnt him to death. And I couldn't help but think, if I was with him, I would have been together with him. You know, so these were some of the instances that should have said, David, stop what you're doing. David, stop what you're doing. But every time I tried in my own might, because believe me, I did, I just couldn't. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew where I was I shouldn't have been. But hard as I tried, I couldn't stop. I had lost 4 friends. In fact, last week I heard about another lady that died. 4 friends to drugs. One of them, my very good friend from Covenant University too. 4 of my friends died in that 7-year period. In closing, one day I was in the bunk, and God bless my mother, and God bless all the mothers here. Every time, the moment my mom discovered where the bunk was, I knew that's where her son was. She would, once I'm not around, she would come there to look for me. Very dangerous place. She has been robbed there before. Took her phone, took her money. But she would always come back. So, one time I was there, and they said, your mom is around. Because they will even come and tell you. And then they'll try to hide you from your family so that you don't go and you keep making money for them. So that day I just said I had had enough. I wasn't going to stay here anymore. So I walked out. I was wearing only my boxers and my inner vest with no shoes on my feet. So I just walked out, and I saw her. She was crying, and she hugged me, And she said, it's okay, let's just go to the car. So we went to the car, and then we were driving home. She was listening to a message. And at that point, I just said, look, I was going to take my life. I wasn't going to continue hurting everybody that meant so much to me. And I wasn't going to continue fighting a battle that I couldn't win. So I made up my mind to take my life. So we got to the house. She asked one of the stewards to serve me food, and she went up to sleep. I mixed bleach and poison, rat poison. I put in half a bottle of Coke. Then I wrote a suicide note. And I apologized. And I explained how difficult it was to be able to get out of addiction. And I also said in that note that for everybody who will read this after my demise, we should get knowledge, because this can happen. I had seen too many cases in the bunk, too many for me to talk about today, about people you would never expect to have fallen prey to addiction. So people should get more knowledge. That's what I wrote there. And I drank that mixture. As soon as I drank it, I dropped to the ground. I started foaming from my mouth. And my brother, who I didn't even know was in the country, because remember, I've been in the bunk, he just comes in, he sees me in the middle of the living room, and he was just going to walk past me to his room, because he just assumed, my Egbon has gone to go and useless his life again. But then while he was walking, he saw that suicide note. And then he read it, and he knew there was a problem, so he called for help. My mom ran downstairs. She was just tying a wrapper over her chest, and then they picked me up with our security man, put me in the car, and they took me to Federal Medical Center, Jabi, in Abuja. And then by the time on our way there, they kept on trying to wake me up because I was going in and out of consciousness. And my mom was hitting me as hard as she could. I couldn't feel the pain. I could feel the thug when she was hitting me. They called my pastor, and he kept on declaring that I will not die, but live to declare the works of the Lord in the land of the living. I eventually passed out, and I woke up in about 2 days. When I woke up, my mom was by my bedside wearing the same wrapper she had worn when she took me to the hospital. She was crying to God, and the only thing I heard was, oh God, take my life. Now, not David's life, her own life, if that will return her son to sanity. So when I heard that, I cried. She didn't know I was awake, and I slept back. And I heard clearly in my spirit. I heard it like you can hear me now. I heard, a new heart will I give unto you. I will put my spirit inside of you. I will take away the heart of stone and give to you the heart of flesh. And I woke up. And when I woke up this time, there were more people around. Doctors were there, psychiatrists were there, my family was there. And I felt different for the first time in 7 years. And I asked to be discharged. And they said, no, you can't be discharged. You're on a suicide watch. I said, I'm fine. They said, no, you're not. I said, I want to go. So they give me a form to fill. Dr. Amarachi is her name. She was the consultant at the time. That against medical advice, I'm insisting on going. So I sign it and I leave. And I go home, and when I sleep and wake up the next morning, I knew for a fact that God had delivered me. That God had delivered me. How did I know? Prior to that time, whenever I wake, in fact, I was smoking 30 sticks of cigarettes a day. At the minimum, yes. And you know the way you go to sleep, God says he gives his beloved sleep. You sleep from 11, 12, and you wake up 5 in the morning. I couldn't do that. I will wake up in hourly intervals. Not of my own doing, but because I needed to smoke. So I will not be able to go back to sleep except I smoke 5 to 6 sticks of cigarettes. I couldn't use the toilet. Literally, nothing will come out if I wasn't smoking. So when I woke up that day in the house and I went to the toilet and I could use the toilet without smoking, I knew God had delivered me. Now, secondly, at the bunk, I used to use a minimum of 2 grams a day, 2 grams of crack cocaine, 0.5 gram of heroin. Now, let me quickly explain how this works. When you start using a drug like crack cocaine, it's a stimulant. It makes you very hyperactive. Then you now need to use a depressant or an opioid, like heroin, to calm you down. Now, this is a cycle most people struggling with addiction live. You can't break out of it. When you use this, you have your dose, because it's a sickness. So you have your dose. Mine was 2 grams of cocaine, half of heroin, and that cost me about 30,000 naira daily. Now, whether I had the money or not, the dealers in that bunk were going to give me those drugs because I'll be a nuisance there if they didn't give me. So they will give it to me on credit, and I will go out to beg for the money and come back and pay for it, pending the next day if I have money or I'm going to take on credit. So this was done every day. And that's the cycle of addiction that I was suffering. So when I had gone home and I didn't need to use this, I also knew God had delivered me. So immediately I checked in myself for therapy. There was a doctor, he's late now. So I was seeing him for 3 months. And then after that, I registered an organization where we started going around to talk to persons about drug use and how it can affect them. And to the glory of God today, including this wonderful crowd here, we've spoken to over 100,000 persons. Our organization has been able to treat over 60 persons for substance use addiction for free. And God has been helping us to reach larger audiences to reduce the scourge of addiction. Finally, I have too many stories. Now, this is the finally. One day we went out, because part of what we do is go back to the bunks to give back. You know, God has delivered us, right? So now we have to go back. And then when I go to the bunks, especially in Abuja, some of you, if you go to my social media page, you'll see some of the pictures of when I go to the bunks, and you see what a bunk looks like. When I go back to the bunk, they are excited to see me because they feel like this is one of their own. So when I walk in, everybody is happy, and you have people crying and saying, David, God that did it for you will do it for me. There are people that are there, that were there before I started using, and they are still there today. So one day I went there, and before this, in 2015, I went to a hotel in Abuja to buy drugs. And then when I got there, I opened the hotel door. I saw 5 young girls, secondary school students, in the hotel room. So I was asking the dealer, what are you doing with these young girls? And he quickly explained to me a very satanic scheme that he has, where he had infiltrated their school through one of their staff, sir, and got these girls addicted to drugs. Now, these girls wouldn't be in school when their parents think they're in school. They will come to meet him in the hotel. What does he do with them? He sends them on errands to deliver his merchandise to his customers. His idea was, if police or NDLA or soldier sees a young girl in uniform in her school bag, would they search her? So that's what he was doing. So when he did that, I saw those girls that day and I felt sorry for them. But in 2015, I was still struggling with addiction. I couldn't do anything. Now, fast forward to 2019, I was in the bunk, and then we're about to leave. We're going to our project vehicle. And one of the ladies shouted, excuse me, sir, excuse me, sir. And I looked at her. I couldn't recognize her. She said, don't you recognize me? I said, no, I don't. Who are you? She said she was one of the girls that were in that hotel room in 2015. Now, this girl was wearing just male boxers and a vest too. So I couldn't marry the images because that school was a very expensive school. So I said, what are you doing here? How did you end up here? And she explained to me that shortly after that encounter at that hotel, that dealer was nowhere to be found. But out of the 5 of them, she had gotten addicted to drugs. Obviously, she didn't know where to get. But she remembered that the guy had sent her to the bunk before. So she comes to the bunk, naive, innocent, at age 15, not knowing how dangerous the place is. And they tell her, do you have your 15,000 naira to buy? And of course, where's that the young girl supposed to get that kind of money from? So they started taking advantage of her. They started molesting her. So much so that she eventually got HIV. When she got the HIV, she's a Muslim from a very influential family. When she got the HIV, she runs back home. Her father says, you've embarrassed the family name. Go back to where you're coming from. The only place she knew where to go back to was the bunk. So that day when I saw her, my knees buckled. And I felt so sorry. I said, I left her in 2015. I'm not going to leave her today, even if it means her sleeping in my house. Because I was with my wife. I go with my wife for all of my outreaches. She's been very supportive. So my wife took her. We started calling all of the relevant government agencies and all of that. We got in touch with the family, did psychoeducation for them, got in touch with NACA, NAPTIP, and all of that. And we're able to get her into rehabilitation. We took her out of Abuja to Jos, where she was able to finish her secondary school. And today she's in Cardiff in the United Kingdom, doing very well. Of course, still living with the ailment, but in a lot more better place. Why did I share this story? Parents, in closing, we must understand the times and seasons we are in. We must, like the sons of Issachar, we must know the times and seasons we are in, and we must know what to do in parenting our children. We live in a drug-fueled world. I told you just last week, they told me about another young girl that just died. And sometimes, right underneath our noses, our children might be using drugs. If you don't understand the telltale signs, if you don't understand what to look out for, if you don't understand the behavioral changes, you just might fall prey. That will be the portion of anybody here in Jesus' name. Thank you very much. I had a great time.
There's a lot more to us in this house.
In this house, Christ is the center of everything we do. If Christ doesn't approve of it, count us out. We are Christ-centered.
In this house, we have the spirit of excellence. We strive to do better than our best. Our path is only permitted to shine brighter and brighter. We are excellence-driven.
In this house, we believe in discipleship. As Apostle Paul said, "Be ye followers of me, as I am of Christ." In other words, follow no road. We are disciples.
I can live my life the way I want. I'm not answerable to anybody. We don't do that here. In this house, we believe in accountability because our life is a trust and everything we do will be accounted for.
In this house, we believe in relationships. But Christianity is not just about believing, it is also about belonging. We make friends, and friends turn family.
So you see, we belong to a kingdom. And in this kingdom, the King of Kings has constituted authorities. And we know better than to dishonor them.
This is Cedars.
This is Cedars.
This is Cedars.
This is Cedars.
Welcome home.